Hi, this is John, the Rev. Thanks for stopping by. This is my house, and this is the first installment of our teaching on the Gospel of Matthew. It's really going to be important that you listen to the introduction. So if you haven't done that, if you can go back and listen to that, that'd be great. One of the things I point out in the introduction that's really important for us as we go on is to understand that we're reading from our own context. We're reading from a context of 2,000 years of Christian history, and we tend to look back at the Bible as something that was written with us in mind, that the Bible was written for us, which is kind of self-absorbed, but that might be my natural tendency. I don't know if you struggle with that at all. The problem in doing that is we forget that the Bible, and particularly the Gospels, were actually written to certain people. And Matthew was written to a group of Jewish Christians. These people would be familiar with Jewish culture. They would identify themselves as Jews. They would know the Jewish scriptures in a way that is probably much more profound than we would. And Matthew is writing to them to explain Jesus and the way in which we are to follow him. Now, if we look at the Gospel of Matthew from their eyes instead of from our own, all of a sudden we begin to get a sense of the radical nature of what Jesus came and did and said and taught. And it challenges us to live a faith that is a lot more tangible and I think a lot more revolutionary within the world that we live in right now. And so that's what this study is about. Now, we're in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, what's commonly called the genealogy. It's usually that place in Scripture where so-and-so begat so-and-so, and we just practice our speed reading to get to the good parts. And the problem is in this case, we miss a lot if we did that, particularly if we're looking at this like Jewish people. What we have is we have the genealogy start with the name Jesus Christ. This is the origin of Jesus Christ. Now, the word Christ is the Greek word for Messiah. So right at the beginning, Jesus is identified as the Messiah. And then you have a genealogy that follows. Now, in the genealogies throughout history, what you tend to have is you tend to have the author giving this genealogy to lend support to the claims of the person, of the main character. In Josephus' histories, he talks about his own genealogy, pointing out that he comes from a line of priests, somehow connecting himself with that in order to add authority to what he's saying. Well, Matthew, doing the same with Jesus, his purpose in the genealogy seems to be to connect Jesus with the Hebrew narrative. That seems to be his purpose, to connect Jesus with the Hebrew culture and people, which would make sense because that's the people he's writing to. Now, when he begins to do this, he says that Jesus is the son of David and the son of Abraham. Now, normally you would put Abraham first because Abraham was the father. But what you'll find in the genealogies and then throughout the rest of Matthew's gospel is Matthew seems to focus on the kingship of Christ. So in this particular instance, we're looking at Christ as the heir, or Jesus as the heir to the throne of David. That's what becomes the most important part. So, as you begin to read through, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but then you get to Judah, and all of a sudden something weird happens. A woman is mentioned. Now, in a male-dominated Hebrew society, when that woman's name popped up, immediately you would say, wait a minute, what is that name there for? And a Hebrew person who's familiar with the scriptures would know that name, Tamar. See, she's notorious for being a woman who pretended to be a prostitute so that she could sleep with her father-in-law, and from that gave birth to 2 children. That's part of Jesus' lineage. Again, you read a little bit further down, we bump into Rahab. Rahab, like Tamar, was a Gentile. She wasn't a Jewish person. In the genealogy of Jesus, you find women that were not Jews. The next woman that's mentioned is Ruth, who in the biblical narrative is this beautiful, faithful woman. But again, she's a Gentile. Now, the next woman that we run into, and again, like I mentioned, we would go, wait, what's the woman doing there? And we'd immediately realize that there's importance to that name. Uh, but in this case, there is no name. The woman that's listed in this case, her name isn't given. She's so disappointing to the narrative that this actual Jewish woman is not named. She's only called the one who was the wife of Uriah, because Bathsheba was married to a Gentile, cheated on him with David. David then murdered her husband and continued his line through her, which is, again, a number of skeletons in the closet that you wouldn't normally put in a genealogy. Now, why were these included? That becomes especially problematic when you realize that a number of names weren't recorded. There was 3 kings that we know of that were left out of the genealogy. And from Abraham to David, there seems to obviously have been some names that were left out there as well. So we wind up having this struggle, like, if you're going to leave out all these people, why did you include the people that you did? Now, this might seem fanciful, but for people in that time, they would have said, why did you include these people? Particularly when you left out others. They would know this. The reason to me seems rather obvious. Jesus comes as the Messiah. He comes bringing the good news. He comes as heir to the throne of David. He comes as part of a child of promise, the promise of Abraham. Good news to the Gentiles. The good news of Jesus is for Jew and Gentile. The good news of Jesus is for the good and the bad. The good news of Jesus is for the rich and the poor, the good kings, the bad kings, the successful and the not successful, for the male and the female. This is all in the genealogy, but we sometimes miss it because we just think it's a list of people. Matthew wasn't as concerned with the history as he was for teaching us that who Jesus comes from is essential for us to understanding who he is, which is essential for us understanding who we are. We're people not forgotten by God because he sent his Christ from us and to us. To me, that's brilliant. In addition to that, we see that Matthew lists there's 14 generations from David to Abraham, 14 generations from David to the Babylonian captivity, and 14 from the Babylonian captivity to Joseph. And as I've already said, that's not true. It's actually, there's names that are left out. So why did Matthew say that? Why is the number 14 so important? Well, the number 14, once again, in the Hebrew culture, would be written out in a way that would also be the name David. So you'd have David's name repeated 3 times. Just like the word David, whenever David is written, it's David the king. This genealogy sets up the rest of the gospel because this gospel says that Jesus comes as the king of a new kingdom. Or, the same word, empire. The gospel of Jesus says that there's a new empire as opposed to the Roman Empire. And in this empire, good and bad and poor and rich and Jew and Gentile are all equal value.